Mark Jacobson has worked on some of the most complex and politically sensitive national security issues facing the United States. He will speak at the World Affairs Council of Western Massachusetts about a domestic issue on his mind, a struggle against political warfare, propaganda, and disinformation in the United States. I spoke with him about that and more in the studio.
Well, I've been looking at propaganda and disinformation since I was in graduate school, so about 20 years ago. Not many people cared back then. The Cold War was over. We weren't in a war of ideas with the Soviet Union. But of course, events of the last several years have caused a resurgence of interest in political warfare and propaganda. My concern is there are many people out there who think this is brand new. This is a result of social media and the internet, when this is an age-old problem.
With the internet, though, that new-ish piece, what does that do to change this conversation?
Interestingly enough, Mark Zuckerberg, in his testimony on Capitol Hill a couple of years ago, said, we were prepared for the Russians to launch a cyber attack and mess with our systems, but we weren't prepared for this new type of warfare, this propaganda campaign. And it drove me up a wall, because that's the old stuff. I mean, if you go back to the Bible, the serpent in the Garden of Eden was the first purveyor of disinformation. And what concerned me in particular was that people needed to understand that cyber, social media, those are new vectors. In fact, if you look at the dawn of the printing press and the Gutenberg printing press, almost immediately after Gutenberg was able to help mass produce Bibles, you had disinformation being purveyed using the new Gutenberg printing presses. So this is not simply a matter of new technology. It's a matter of something that has always existed in our space, and we have to understand as kind of a classic problem of media and interpersonal communication and politics.
One more question about this, and then I'll move us on to more current political affairs. But looking at that issue, how do you help the average consumer who's using Facebook and Twitter every single day, looking at this flashy headline that's been put in their feed, and they think, oh my gosh, look at issue X, this proves my point, but it's from, gobstoppers.uk.com. My point is a seemingly unsafe site. How do you call that to people's attention?
So what I hope to talk about with the Council on World Affairs is that there are some technical solutions. There are some things we can do. Think about the Blue Star Energy seal of approval. There can be ways of identifying sites that are seen as legitimate regardless of bias and those that are illegitimate. But I also think we often talk about the need to bring back civic education, civic literacy to our schools, media literacy as well. In fact, State University of New York at Stony Brook, they have a big program in media literacy, but they argue that if you don't hit people by the time they're 18 years old, they're sort of set in their ways in terms of being able to think critically about what they have out there. And that's really at the heart, I think, of any solution to dealing with this problem of propaganda and disinformation.
So aside from your upcoming talk at the World Affairs Council, you're also a visiting professor at Amherst College, part of the reason we have you in today. But you're an expert on foreign policy. You've worked in government. You now consult. But I'd like to talk to you about what's going on with the Kurds in Syria. You're of the opinion that President Trump's decision to remove those troops makes the United States weaker. Why?
I'd say in two ways. First, if you look at it in terms of our strategy to be able to maintain and support U.S. interests in the Middle East. Some are economic, some are humanitarian, and some are in terms of our ability to have alliances to tackle significant problems like terrorism. First, our credibility is shattered. We have just dropped our strongest ally in the region, the Kurds, who have worked side by side with us, fought side by side with American troops, bled with American troops, and in 24 hours, we just turned our back on them. How is the U.S. to be trusted? In fact, interestingly enough, even stalwart Trump allies such as Benjamin Netanyahu have said this is the wrong decision. Secondly, we've ceded a lot of ground to the Russians. If there is going to be a solution in Turkey, I would argue a couple of years ago, the U.S. and Russia could have worked with Assad and the Kurds and the Turks and others. Now, we have no power there. This is now the Russians' game, and that's going to have long-term consequences. The second thing I worry about is just what we've seen in terms of reactions from our own troops and their concerns about what we've done in doing this 180-degree turn overnight.
What have you heard about that issue specifically?
Well, even with the Iraq War, I have never heard such strong language coming anonymously in the press from serving military officers. The other thing that's interesting, both in terms of private conversations I've had and people in the community have had, and things that have gone out into the press, you have serving special forces officers who've been working side by side with the Kurds saying, I'm not quite sure what to do now. I have to tell them I don't have their backs anymore. And what we forget, this decision was so quick that no one had planned on how to get our troops out of there safely. So I think that what the troops are seeing is that the commander-in-chief has made a decision that actually put them in harm's way. And I think this has huge ramifications for those who have supported Trump to this point. There are others who thought he is not a good commander-in-chief, but now that he's deliberately, or as a result of not thinking and listening to his advisors, put troops in harm's way, some may have to reevaluate whether he's fit for the job.
To your point about exit strategy, in some cases, I feel like we look at U.S. foreign policy, we get involved in situation X. In this case, it's the Kurds in Syria. And we do so because of a reason. In this case, it was to help combat ISIS. But you've worked in foreign policy for a long time. To what extent does the U.S. ever plan an exit strategy?
Well, what's interesting is, my old boss, General Petraeus, said famously about Iraq, tell me how this ends. I think what we forget is certain types of deployments aren't going to end. U.S. troops still in Japan, U.S. troops still in Germany, but they're not engaged in combat operations. They're not engaged in peacekeeping operations. Their deployment is for our own military capability and advantage as a global power, and our presence in other places is just to keep stability. For example, a very limited number of U.S. troops, I think just over 1,000 in Syria, including, depending who you believe, 50 or 100 up near the Turkish border, were keeping a lid on a potential conflict between Turkey and the Kurds. That's a pretty small investment, and it's not without risk. You're not talking about the high risk for a large loss of life amongst U.S. troops. So I think while there's a great desire amongst the American people to see some restraint in terms of the use of military force, this is actually a very effective use of a small number of troops to prevent a larger war. So in short, they're not all quite the same. But I understand why the American people are wary about troops in the Middle East and in Central Asia.
But also, I think for the average person watching this at home who is not entrenched in foreign policy in general or this very specific foreign policy issue, they hear that number, 1,000 or so troops, at some point 2,000 or 3,000, and they think, that's a small number of folks. What is the big deal?
You have two types. Some folks who say that's the first step into, as you said, a war that may not have an exit strategy. Look at Vietnam. At first, it was 500 advisors, then 1,000, and before you know it, over 500,000 American troops on the ground. That would be, the pessimistic way of looking at it. The way I tend to look at it is I would rather deploy small numbers of U.S. forces and invest in U.S. Agency for International Development programs, at a cost to the American people, ahead of the major problem, to try and preclude a larger conflict from happening. To me, that's a wise use of U.S. forces and a reason to have them deployed around the world. I am not a fan of wars that don't have a strategic purpose or the use of military force to make us feel good. And it's definitely a last resort. But this is actually a case like perhaps Bosnia or Kosovo, where a small number of U.S. forces in a short period of time has made a difference. And yes, we may have to have an enduring commitment. That's a very small price to pay compared to being dragged into a larger Middle East war.
One last question. We talked about the anonymous response that some U.S. officials or military members have been saying. What, if any, response has there been from their advisor, from their leaders? Actually,
I think there was a wonderful response the other day by the new Secretary of the Army, Ryan McCarthy, himself a former special operations officer back in the beginning of the Afghanistan war.
Relatively new to the post, July.
Yeah, brand new to the post, Secretary of Defense Esper, having held that post before. McCarthy said, look, we can't have people disobeying, but dissent is good. we want to hear what they have to think. We want people to think critically. And I think he's right, that these folks who've spoken out, they're not actively disobeying orders. They're speaking out and trying to do so in a proper way. And I think it's so important that he is being the leader they need right now by saying, look, criticize us. And this is actually the opposite of what civilian and military leaders did during and right after the Vietnam War, when they didn't want to hear the criticism from the junior officers.